At 11:30 on the morning of December 12, 1862, the ironclad river gunboat USS Cairo steamed north along the Yazoo River, 6 miles above its junction with the Mississippi. Commander Thomas O. Selfridge Jr., 30 years old, stood on the exposed hurricane deck of his vessel, scanning the muddy brown water line through field glasses. Ahead, the river narrowed. Dense stands of cypress and tupelo pressed in from both banks, their skeletal winter branches draped with Spanish moss. Somewhere beneath that dark water lay something no warship commander in history had ever faced. A weapon with no muzzle flash, no smoke, no warning. A weapon that was, for all practical purposes, invisible. Selfridge had reason to be cautious. 2 days earlier, the tin-clad USS Marmara had been damaged by a crude underwater explosive while clearing the same stretch of river. The device had detonated near the bow, buckling hull plates but failing to breach the waterline. The Marmara limped back to the fleet. Her captain reported what he'd found. Glass demijohns packed with black powder, sealed with tar, connected to insulated copper wires that ran to the riverbank. The Confederates were planting torpedoes, not the self-propelled weapons that would bear that name decades later, but stationary underwater mines hidden just below the surface, detonated by an operator on shore watching through the trees. The concept was not entirely new. Underwater explosives had been discussed in military circles since the Revolutionary War, when David Bushnell attached a powder keg to a submersible craft and attempted to sink a British warship in New York Harbor. But those were contact devices, crude, unreliable, dependent on physical collision. What the Confederates had developed along the Yazoo was something fundamentally different. These torpedoes used galvanic batteries and insulated wire. A hidden observer on shore watched the river, waited for a vessel to pass directly over the submerged charge, and closed an electrical circuit. The detonation was instantaneous, precise, and devastating. No one aboard the target ship would see it coming. No one aboard would have time to react. This was the invention of a single man. Acting Master Zeri McDaniel, a Confederate torpedo specialist operating under the broader authority of Brigadier General Martin Luther Smith, had been tasked with mining the Yazoo River as part of Vicksburg's outer defensive perimeter. McDaniel understood something that most military planners of 1862 had not yet grasped. You did not need to match the Union's industrial superiority ship for ship. You needed only to make the rivers themselves hostile. A 5-gallon demijohn filled with gunpowder cost almost nothing. An ironclad gunboat cost the Union $101,808 and took months to build. The arithmetic was devastating. McDaniel's torpedo design was elegant in its simplicity. A large glass container, typically a 5-gallon demijohn used for storing whiskey or turpentine, was filled with black powder. The neck was sealed with pitch and wax to keep the charge dry. Copper detonation wires ran from a friction primer, or fulminate cap embedded in the powder, through a waterproofed insulation of gutta percha or tarred cotton, across the river bottom and up the bank to a concealed firing position. The entire apparatus was anchored just below the waterline using ropes tied to submerged logs or driven stakes. From the surface, nothing was visible. From shore, the operator had a clear line of sight to the kill zone. The Union Navy had no countermeasure. No doctrine existed for this kind of threat. Minesweeping, as a formal naval discipline, would not emerge for another 40 years. The best Selfridge could do was send smaller boats ahead to drag the river bottom with grappling hooks and cutters, trying to snag and sever the detonation wires before the heavier ironclads passed through. On the morning of December 12th, that task fell to the Marmara and the tin-clad USS Signal, both of which had been working the river for days, pulling up debris, cutting wires, and detonating charges with rifle fire when they could spot them near the surface. The Cairo followed behind, covering the mine-sweeping boats with her heavy guns. She was a city-class ironclad built by James Eads at the Mound City Shipyard in Illinois and commissioned in January 1862. 175 feet long, 51 feet 6 inches wide, drawing 6 feet of water. Her casemate was armored with 2.5 inches of iron plate backed by 24 inches of oak. She carried 13 guns, 3 8-inch smoothbores, 3 42-pounder rifles, 4 32-pounder smoothbores, and a single 30-pounder Parrott rifle. Her twin engines, powered by 5 boilers, drove a single stern-mounted paddle wheel that could push her to 6 knots in calm water. Against the Yazoo's current, she made perhaps 4. She had already seen action at Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, Plum Point Bend, and Memphis. She was battle-tested. She was also, at this moment, completely vulnerable. The river ahead curved to the right. The banks closed in. Cypress knees jutted from the shallows. At approximately 11:45, Selfridge ordered the Cairo forward to support the Marmara, which had come under light rifle fire from Confederate sharpshooters concealed along the eastern bank. The sharpshooters were a nuisance. Their Enfield rifles could not penetrate the Cairo's armor, but they forced Selfridge to keep his crew behind the casemate, limiting observation. What Selfridge did not know, what he could not have known, was that the sharpshooters were not there to damage his ship. They were there to hurt it. The rifle fire drew the Cairo deeper into the mine channel. Selfridge, eager to suppress the threat and protect his lighter escorts, pushed forward. The river bottom here was soft Mississippi mud, 16 to 20 feet deep, visibility 0. Beneath the Cairo's flat hull, 2 5-gallon demijohns sat in the murk, wired and waiting. At approximately 11:50, the first torpedo detonated directly beneath the port bow. The explosion was massive, a deep percussive concussion that lifted the forward section of the Ironclad and sent a geyser of brown water and mud cascading across the deck. Before the crew could process what had happened, a second detonation struck beneath the starboard bow. The twin blasts tore open the Cairo's hull plates below the waterline, rupturing compartments that had never been designed to withstand attack from below. Iron armor, for all its strength against cannonballs, offered no protection against a mine. The force came from underneath, from the one direction the designers had never anticipated. Water poured into the forward compartments at a catastrophic rate. Acting First Master James P. Hartsfield, stationed below decks, reported the flooding immediately. The bow was sinking fast, dragging the entire vessel forward and down. Selfridge ordered the engines reversed, trying to back the Cairo toward the shallow eastern bank where she might ground herself, before going under completely. The paddle wheel churned. The hull groaned. It was not enough. The Cairo's flat-bottom design, which made her ideal for river operations, now worked against her. With no keel to provide structural rigidity, the flooded bow sections pulled the entire hull into a downward pitch. Water rushed aft through open hatchways and unsealed bulkheads. The pumps, hand-operated and designed for normal leakage, could not begin to match the inflow. Within minutes, the gun deck was awash. Selfridge gave the order to abandon ship. Crew members scrambled up through hatches and across the flooding casemate, grabbing anything that floated. The Yazoo's current pulled at the sinking hull. Some men jumped into the river and swam for the bank. Others were picked up by boats from the Marmara and Signal, which had rushed back at the sound of the explosions. The water was cold. December in Mississippi, river temperature perhaps 45 degrees. Men in heavy wool uniforms and boots struggled to stay afloat. 12 minutes, that was all it took, from the first detonation to the moment the Cairo's pilot house slipped beneath the brown surface of the Yazoo River. 12 minutes elapsed. The first warship in history to be sunk by an electrically detonated mine disappeared into 16 feet of water and 6 feet of Mississippi mud. Her guns, her armor, her engines, her stores, all of it gone. The river closed over her as if she had never existed. Not a single man died. This was the one mercy of the morning. Selfridge's quick order to abandon ship, combined with the shallow depth and the proximity of supporting vessels, meant all 175 crew members survived, but the Cairo herself was a total loss, and the strategic implications were immediate and profound. News of the sinking reached Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter within hours. Porter, commanding the Mississippi Squadron, from his flagship USS Blackhawk, understood instantly what had happened. The Confederates had introduced a weapon that neutralized the Union's most significant tactical advantage on the western rivers, the Ironclad gunboat. These vessels had been the battering rams of the Union's inland naval strategy, floating fortresses that could reduce shore batteries, silence field artillery, and control river traffic with near impunity. A single mine, costing perhaps $5 in materials and requiring no specialized manufacturing, had destroyed one in minutes. Porter's response was furious. Not at the Confederates, but at Selfridge. In his official report, Porter accused Selfridge of recklessness, of pushing too far ahead of his minesweeping escorts, of failing to exercise proper caution in waters known to be mined. Selfridge was relieved of command. A court of inquiry was convened. Selfridge defended himself by arguing that he had been following standard operational procedure. No specific orders existed for dealing with electrically detonated torpedoes because no one had ever encountered them before. The court ultimately cleared Selfridge, and he went on to serve with distinction for the remainder of the war. commanding the USS Huron and later the USS Osage. But the stain of the Cairo's loss followed him for years. The deeper truth was that Porter's anger masked a systemic failure. The Union Navy had received intelligence about Confederate torpedo development months earlier. Captain Isaac Newton Brown, who had commanded the CSS Arkansas during her famous run through the Union fleet at Vicksburg in July 1862, had described Southern efforts to develop underwater weapons. Captured correspondence referenced torpedo experiments along the James River in Virginia. But the Union command structure had dismissed these reports. Underwater mines were considered ungentlemanly, a coward's weapon beneath the dignity of proper naval warfare. This attitude would prove extraordinarily costly. In the months following the Cairo's sinking, Confederate torpedo programs accelerated dramatically. The success on the Yazoo demonstrated proof of concept. Brigadier General Gabriel Rains, already known for his controversial use of landmines during the Peninsula Campaign, was appointed to lead the Confederate Torpedo Bureau. Under Rains's direction, mine technology advanced rapidly. Contact detonated designs using chemical fuses supplemented the electrical models. Mines were deployed in harbors, rivers, and coastal approaches throughout the Confederacy. Mobile Bay, Charleston Harbor, the James River, the Roanoke River, the Cape Fear River. The numbers tell the story. Over the course of the Civil War, Confederate torpedoes sank or damaged 43 Union vessels, 43. More Union ships were lost to mines than to all other Confederate naval weapons combined. More than to shore batteries, more than to enemy warships, more than to rams or boarding actions. The weapon that had been dismissed as ungentlemanly became the single most effective tool in the Confederate naval arsenal. Among the most notable victims, the USS Tecumseh, a Monitor-class ironclad, struck a torpedo and sank in Mobile Bay on August 5, 1864, killing 93 of her 114 crew, the single deadliest torpedo strike of the war. It was during this engagement that Admiral David Farragut allegedly issued his famous order, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." The phrase has entered American mythology as an expression of bold courage. In context, it was a desperate gamble by a commander who understood that hesitation in a mined channel meant death just as surely as pressing forward. The Cairo, meanwhile, lay in her mud grave. The river silt covered her quickly, burying the ironclad beneath layers of sediment. Within months, her exact location was uncertain. Within years, she was forgotten entirely. A footnote in the vast catalog of Civil War losses, overshadowed by the great fleet engagements at Hampton Roads, Mobile Bay, and the Red River. She stayed there for nearly a century. In 1956, historian Edwin C. Bearse, working as a park historian at Vicksburg National Military Park, began researching the Cairo's final resting place. Using wartime correspondence, navigational charts, and accounts from local residents whose families had lived along the Yazoo for generations, Bearse narrowed the search area to a half-mile stretch of river near the old Haynes Bluff fortifications. In 1956, Bearse's and two associates, Warren Grabow and Don Jacks, used a simple compass to detect the magnetic anomaly created by the Cairo's iron casemate beneath the mud. They found her. The salvage effort that followed was long, underfunded, and frequently disastrous. Initial attempts in the early 1960s to raise the Cairo intact failed when the cables cut through her rotted wooden hull. The vessel broke apart during lifting operations, and significant portions of the casemate and machinery were damaged. What eventually emerged from the Yazoo was not a complete ship, but thousands of fragments, artifacts, and structural sections. Enough to reconstruct the vessel's outline, but not her former wholeness. Still, what the mud had preserved was extraordinary. The anaerobic conditions of the river bottom had protected organic materials that would have disintegrated in open air. Boots, clothing, personal effects, medical supplies, weapons, ammunition, tools, provisions. Thousands of items emerged in remarkable condition. Hardtack still bore the stamped marks of Union Army bakeries. Glass bottles retained their original corks. A clock had stopped at the moment of flooding. These artifacts offered an unparalleled window into the daily life of a Civil War River Navy crew. Ordinary men living and fighting aboard an extraordinary machine. Today, the reconstructed remains of the USS Cairo sit in a purpose-built museum at Vicksburg National Military Park. The hull structure, partially restored and sheltered beneath a metal canopy, gives visitors a sense of the vessel's massive scale. Adjacent exhibit halls display the recovered artifacts, more than 1,000 items, alongside interpretive panels explaining the Cairo's construction, service history, and destruction. It is the only Civil War ironclad on display anywhere in the world. The Cairo's legacy extends far beyond the Yazoo River. Her sinking on December 12, 1862, marked the beginning of mine warfare as a permanent feature of naval combat. Every naval power on Earth would eventually grapple with the weapon that Zare McDaniel had deployed with a glass bottle and a length of copper wire. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 saw mines sink battleships. World War I turned the North Sea into a minefield of staggering scale, over 100,000 mines deployed by both sides. World War II saw mines close entire sea lanes across the Pacific and Atlantic, the Korean War, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf. In every major naval conflict since 1862, mines have remained among the cheapest, most effective, and most feared weapons. In the maritime arsenal, the arithmetic that Zare McDaniel understood on the Yazoo River has never changed. A mine costing a few $100s can destroy a vessel worth hundreds of millions. The asymmetry is permanent. It cannot be engineered away. It can only be managed at enormous cost in time, equipment, and human vigilance. Commander Selfridge survived the war. He rose to the rank of Rear Admiral, serving until 1898. He never forgot the 12 minutes on the Yazoo. In his memoirs, he wrote that the Cairo's destruction taught him a lesson that no textbook could, that the most dangerous weapon is the one you cannot see, the one you have no doctrine to counter, the one that strikes from a direction you never thought to guard. The Cairo sits in Vicksburg now, open to the Mississippi sky, her iron bones exposed to the air for the first time in 100 years. Visitors walk beneath her hull and look up through the gaps in her armor. They see the river mud still clinging to the timbers. They read the names of her crew, and they stand in the presence of a ship that changed warfare forever. Not by what she accomplished, but by how she was destroyed.